Good evening, everyone. I'm Charlie Kyle. I'm the principal of Innis College. And before we begin with tonight's event, I will read the Statement of Acknowledgement of Traditional Land. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and celebrate on this land. I'm not supposed to play favorites when it comes to hosting events because my job is to be a neutral party in all things Innis related, but I will just say this has got to be my favorite event of the year because it features one of my favorite people. I'm not going to be the one introducing Sharon English, and I'm sure she needs no introduction to everyone here. But I just want everyone to know that Sharon has been such a vital part of the college for so many years, and I have enjoyed working with her and getting to know her over my time as principal, before that, but certainly during my time as principal. And I can never, I guess, repay the debt I owe to Sharon for taking on an incredibly onerous administrative load at a time when it certainly would have compromised her creative endeavors, probably slowed down the emergence of this book. But this is just, I guess I'm taking this as my opportunity to publicly thank Sharon for all the hard work she did in relation to the Innis Writing and Rhetoric program, which I know is dear to her heart, but also the Writing Center and the Innis One programs, which I think she also cared about. But I don't know that her level of dedication was so extensive that she wanted to run all three of those programs. So this is just my way of saying thank you to Sharon, and that I couldn't be happier that we are having this opportunity to celebrate her work and to hear more from her about that creative process. And to aid in that endeavor, another one of my favorite people, Andrea Most. And you know, Andrea has provided us, as she does, with a bio, and I read it and I thought, well, these aren't the things I'd say about Andrea. But I will read what Andrea thinks I should say about her. But I will simply say, before I say these things, that Andrea has been, and I think this is a modest bio to say the least, that Andrea has been widely acknowledged and awarded by the university on multiple occasions for her innovative pedagogy and scholarship, and that she is probably the best suited person to take on this role of talking with Sharon tonight. And I couldn't be happier that the two of you are part of this evening tonight. So anyway, so let me now read that Andrea, let me say her name wrong too. Andrea Most is Professor of Environmental Humanities and Jewish Studies in the Department of English at the University of Toronto. Director of the Persephone Project, and I'm hoping that Sharon and Andrew will talk a little bit about the Persephone Project, but that's just me. You don't have to listen to me. And co-founder of Bella Farm. Committed to breaking down divisions between scholarship and public life, mind and body, nature and culture, Professor Most teaches experiential courses on food and environmental literature, conducts multidisciplinary community-engaged research, and speaks widely on the local food and environmental movements. So without further ado, I will welcome to the stage both Andrea and Sharon, and Andrea will introduce Sharon, and then a delightful conversation will ensue. So.
Thank you, Charlie, for all that. I'm also incredibly thrilled to be here. And this is the first time I'm standing up on a stage like this in about 3 years. So it's a new, it feels like a new experience again. But anyway, it's really great for this new experience of being on the stage once again to be connected to speaking with Sharon. So it's an incredible pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Sharon English, on the occasion of the publication of this extraordinary book. Sharon and I have been working together for a number of years in a writing group at New College, where I got a peek at early drafts of Night in the World, but it's changed a lot. and on the research team for the Persephone Project, which Charlie mentioned. Sharon was a real soul sister in this endeavor, which is we've sort of completed one part of the Persephone Project. We're on to new, who knows what, parts of it. But Sharon led a riveting and life-changing, for me, workshop for us as part of the Persephone Project on the ecology of the night, where we sat around a bonfire at Rouge Park, which was one of the only places in Toronto she could find where we could actually light a fire. Now, there are many, many other contributions to Persephone Project. Maybe it'll come up in the conversation. For the past 2 years, it has also been an honor to sit in council with Sharon during 19 Ways training with writer and our mentor, Dina Metzger. And now I'll read what Sharon wrote, just as Charlie did for me. Sharon has published 2 collections of short stories, Uncomfortably Numb and Zero Gravity. Zero Gravity was longlisted for the Giller Prize and Relit Award, included in the Globe and Mail's top 100 titles for the year, and recently translated into Serbian. Sharon's stories and essays have also appeared in numerous journals, including Best Canadian Stories, Canadian Notes and Queries, and Dark Mountain in Britain. For over 20 years, Sharon has been teaching writing here at Innis College, as we heard, where she now serves as assistant professor teaching stream in the Writing and Rhetoric program. So please join me in welcoming Sharon English.
Pardon me?
Should I sit there to watch your slides?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, that sounds good. And this is the clicker. Okay. Okay. All right. It's such a pleasure to and an honor to be holding this celebration here at the college that's been my professional home and family for over 20 years. My deep gratitude to Charlie Kyle for organizing and sponsoring this event, for inviting me, and also to the organizing team members, especially Shayla Anderson, wherever she is. I want to thank my co-host and colleague and dear friend, Andrea Most, for agreeing to have this conversation with me, and to Freehand Books, who fed everybody tonight and published my book. So thank you for Freehand. Finally, thank you to all of you for coming here in person. This is only the second in-person event at the college in a couple of years, so it's so meaningful to me that you would make this journey down to be with me tonight. And I also want to thank the people who are tuning in online in the live stream that we presumably have going right now, who are tuning in from afar. So welcome, everybody. Before Andrea and I speak, I just wanted to say a little bit about the genesis of this book. I grew up in the suburbs of London, Ontario, which is about 2 hours from here. And I moved to Vancouver for a while, and then I moved to Toronto in the mid-1990s. And my books, the 3 books, follow this path. Stories, for me, always start with place and our relationship to it. And if I have a kind of bedrock passion or quest or desire, it's to, as a writer, it's to understand how places shape us and how this relationship that we have between where we are and who we are is right at the heart of our lives, I feel. We live in a restless and rootless age, one that propelled the settlement of this country and is still with us in this sense of endless frontier, endless availability of new places to be, new things to have. We know all that. It's our cultural inheritance. The Indigenous writer Robin Wall Kimmerer describes this inherited and culturally propelled restlessness as having only one foot on the shore. The other is in the boat, still not sure if you're staying or going, maybe there's another opportunity somewhere. I think it's a great, it's a wonderful image that evokes that kind of opportunism, lack of commitment, or maybe just lack of certainty about where we are. She speaks about the challenge and, in her opinion, the utter necessity of learning to live here in this land as if we're planted, as if we're really committed to this place, or as she puts it, as if you have both feet on the shore. So, okay, how does a person, say like me, learn to do that? Well, I'd not read Kimmerer's work when I began thinking about this novel, but I was at the time, and this was about 12 years ago, I was keenly aware of ecological crisis, and I was keenly aware of the kind of ever-growing strains and stresses that we're all feeling locally and globally. And I'd come to deeply question this sort of story of separation that our culture tells itself, where kind of human concerns and human civilization is over here, and the natural world is over here, and there's this kind of tense relationship between them, and it's based often on kind of master-servant, I guess would be one way of characterizing it. A kind of a convenient story for industry, but I always felt like our bodies know something else, that life is really interconnection and not separation. So as a personal and creative project, this was what I started to delve into a dozen years ago. I wanted to learn to live differently, as Kimmerer would put it, with both feet on the shore. And at the time, I'd already been in Toronto about 10 years. And I thought I would set out to try and get planted. And I wanted to share just some photographs that I have of kind of where that journey took me, and then I think that's kind of a nice way to lead into the conversation. So, thank you, whoever did that in the booth, and I just pressed the clicker to go forward, I assume. Okay. So we're talking sort of, again, genesis of this book 12 years ago, and I just started wandering through the, I guess, natural places in Toronto, through the various seasons, and gradually some of these places started to become really important to me. One of them being the Humber River and the Humber River Ravine, which features prominently in the book. And I felt I was trying to develop an intimacy, really, with the place that I live, through its seasons and moods. I started exploring other waterways that I didn't know existed. That is a person standing there. It's my friend and fellow wanderer, Jackie. Found a lot of beauty in these places that were kind of hidden away in Toronto. Also found some really interesting ways of getting across the city, like the whole Junction Railroad system, which also features, all these places feature in the book, actually. I first went to Toronto Island for a writing residency, and then as I spent time there, it started to become absolutely integral to the story I was telling. And that'll probably come up in our conversation. I also went further afield as the years went on, because this was years, and certain other places became important to the story, one of them being Rice Lake. That's the Serpent Mound at Rice Lake, which is in the novel. And gradually, as my research deepened, moths, which are featured on the cover, also became very important to the novel. And there was a lot of moth field work, or rather watching moth field work. That is a moth that looks like a bird dropping. It's called The Beautiful Wood Nymph. And yeah, I've just wound up here back at Toronto Island. There were years of, there's me with something, doesn't look like a manuscript, facing south on Toronto Island. My friend Jackie, again, one of our explorations. Okay. So hopefully that sets a little bit of the context for, as I say, the kind of seeds of the book. And I think that's it. Come on up. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, you want me to? Okay.
Thank you. Just got some water.
Okay, here we are.
Oh, okay, we hold these.
We're on, we're live.
Thanks.
I'm glad you started with those photos. The book, most of you haven't read it yet, so we have promised not to include any spoilers. But it's an incredible gift. And for me, it's been an incredible gift because it has allowed me to see the city I live in a completely new way. It has you've brought to life not just the buildings and the human-built environment, but the land on which that all sits, and the water that is so integral also, which we saw so many photos of. So I've been thinking about this a lot because in my teaching, especially this class that I've told Sharon about many times, I'm always reaching for this kind of storytelling. Can we hear the land telling stories? And I have this class where I take my students onto Philosopher's Walk the whole term. We're on Philosopher's Walk, and I'm asking them to listen for the stories that the land wants to tell. And one of the stories that is so prominent on Philosopher's Walk is the story of Tattle Creek, which is buried under Philosopher's Walk. And we go to this storm drain that's under the willow tree down near the law school steps. And if you look down to that storm drain, you can see the creek and you can hear it. And I feel like the echoes of that buried creek are the kinds of echoes that are playing out throughout the narrative. So there is a question in all of this, which is I would love to hear more about how you think place and land in particular, land and water, shape the narrative. Because usually we think of it the other way around, right? The human writer represents the land or whatever, but is the land writing in some way or telling a story here?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to start with the slides and just the story of coming to be intimate with these places in Toronto over the years, and how that intimacy, such as it was, it could certainly go a lot further, but such as it was, started to shape the story. And I felt as I was thinking about this story that what I really wanted to do, and you just brought this up, so typically in story writing, and I think in our lives too, the land or the natural world is like this background, right? And then the foreground is the human drama and everything that's playing out. And sometimes the background, the natural world, becomes more important if it does something we don't like, for example, or something that we like. It comes more into awareness, and then it kind of recedes back again. And what I wanted to do was to write a book where the experience for the reader was of kind of starting with the status quo of here's us and our urban concerns, here's the characters, and then gradually, like somebody turning up the volume, the land just starts to speak more or become more and more prominent in the book, to the point where hopefully by the time you get to the end, there's a sense where we're kind of there's a kind of centering, a sort of like the human drama is more in the circle of life, I guess that would be, rather than nature here, us here. There's a sense of the whole circle of life, and those voices of the river, the island, the lake, feel like they're part of the chorus almost, or like around. That was what I was trying to do. And how to do it was complicated, but that was the idea. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how to do it? Like, how do you write with the land?
Wow. Well, it's really deeply embedded in the story in a whole bunch of ways. Like the structure of the story is. The story's in three perspectives, three different perspectives, three characters, and I titled those perspectives the river, the island, and the lake, so that they're kind of located geographically at a point in the city, and those elements are vital to each of those characters' stories. And I found that was just like one way that I tried to center the stories on the land, even while we're following the characters, and there's lots of drama and lots of stuff happening, lots of action. And then there was just the story itself, which is about characters, these people coming to have a much sort of moving from disconnection and in their lives, and they're each disconnected in different ways from family, from their work, from obviously the natural world. It's complicated, but they're very different people, but they each have in common this journey of moving from a place of disconnect to profound relationship with the natural world. Which, especially for one character in particular, is completely, I think, unexpected, or it should be, and and then I had to show that relationship as ultimately a healing relationship. So, and then there's lots more.
Yeah,
But those are some of the ways. Yeah.
I know I want to talk about a few of them. We'll see what we can reveal and what we can't reveal.
Yeah.
Let me just pick up on one thing you said earlier on in your response, which is around what is land usually doing in a novel, right? And we've sorry, not using the mic. We've both read Amitav Ghosh's The Great Derangement and spoken about it.
Yeah.
And Ghosh argues that the realist novel is not only inadequate for representing the enormity of the environmental crisis we face, but that it's possibly part of the problem, right? Because treating land as merely the setting or background, like you said, for human drama it reinforces that separation between the human and the land, which you're trying to break down, and then which you do break down in the novel for sure, and it allows for the destruction that we witness all around us, because that separation allows that. And he argues for other genres, like myth and epic and a few others, but you chose to write a novel, and it's mostly a realist novel, but it seems to sort of like not fall into that trap. Which is very impressive, by the way, and wonderful. And like one of the most powerful characters in the story is the land. The land seems to have real agency. So I'm really interested. I mean, also, you're known as a short story writer, and you've spoken about Ghosh's ideas many times. So both of those lead me to ask why you chose the novel form to tell this story. And I have other questions. Let's just start there. Why did you choose the novel form? What did it do for you, and how do you negotiate these challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I chose the novel in terms of moving from being a story writer to a novelist. I chose the novel because of its more sort of urgent, passionate sweep that it has, at least in terms of its effect on the reader. although I'm passionate about story writing, short story writing, I'm also aware that novels do have a kind of dramatic pull to them that is often very difficult to get in a short story collection, even a linked short story collection, which I've written. So I did it really for dramatic purposes. And as for why a realistic novel, I think that's a great question. So Ghosh, what Ghosh talks about specifically is the realistic novel, which is like your typical literary novel that is very grounded in what we just call realism, as opposed to like a fantasy novel or sci-fi or these other genres. And realism, he talks about this, like realism is basically a framework, right? It's a framework that says this is consensual reality. This is what we all agree on as real, and this is in literary novels, but of course it's mirroring our lives. It's mirroring our collective sense of consensual reality, and the problem, as he says, and I agree with that framework, is that it is a worldview as well. It's realism, as we understand it, excludes certain kinds of experience, certain kinds of knowledge as not real, or as kind of, it sort of pushes them aside. For example, say spiritual experience, or other so-called supernatural experience, or whatever. You could go on a long list of things that kind of are moved out of the realistic framework. And one of those things, in terms of my interest, was the sense of how we know and experience the natural world. Personally, I experience the natural world as a living, conscious, diverse sort of collective of intelligences that are all doing their own thing and communicating, and we're part of that web of life. But as Ghosh says, and as you just pointed out, in a typical realistic novel, you're not going to have, say, an animal character who is, is portrayed as having like an awareness that we would regard as awareness, or even really that is terribly important to the story, usually. So what I wanted to do with this book was, instead of, say, writing a fantasy story, which I love fantasy, but instead of writing a fantasy story, I just wanted to try and write a realistic novel that kind of expanded the framework of what's allowed as real. Because to me, how I see land, I think that's how things are. So I wanted, as I said, the reader to kind of begin with one sense of the status quo, and then at the end, hopefully, end up with a sense of the world as being this diverse all these diverse beings that have their own agency. Again, I don't want to give too much away in the book, but that have their own agency, and that is what's real, in my opinion. So
that's amazing. I love the way you just put that, because that is the experience of reading the book, but I hadn't quite realized what was happening. Is what you're saying is that it remains a realist novel, but what changes is what we think falls within the category of the real. And it just makes you think like, wow, we have a really narrow understanding of what the real is. And just like, even just the glimpses we get in this novel of what's possible,
mm-hmm.
the kind of communication that's possible,
Mm-hmm.
It can be life-changing. And it's certainly
Thanks.
life-changing for the characters.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to talk about one of these things, but I guess we
Don't.
can't. Okay, so
No spoilers.
no spoilers. Okay, you got to read that part. You got to read the whole thing. Okay, so in in expanding our sense of who we are in the world and who the world is, what the world is around us, you're doing something that is imaginative and creative, but it's also political and urgent. And we've talked a lot in our work together about storytelling as a form of activism, and this novel feels like a call to a new way of being, a new way of being in the world. And each of the characters, you mentioned this, so I can say it, each of the characters in Night in the World undergoes radical transformations. The land claims them and acts upon them. And so I'm sort of wondering, do you see their journeys as a kind of roadmap for your readers? Do you think the storytelling itself can offer us ways to re-encounter the world that we and what are those ways? I guess I could ask. Yeah, there's a lot of questions in one. I'll repeat some of them.
Okay, so and jump in if I've forgotten something here. So first of all, storytelling, the importance of storytelling and activism and political, the politics of that. I think the importance of storytelling in these times can't be overstated, because we live in a world of narratives, and our sense of as we've just talked about, our sense of reality, of our sense of what's right, wrong, good, bad, important, not important, is all wrapped up in the stories that we're told or that we inherit about our world, and that get reinforced in our culture. So storytelling that can challenge some of those stories that are maybe harmful or problematic, storytelling that can challenge those is incredibly important. So I do think that whatever the effect of this story is, it does have that political intent to try and shift people's awareness and sense of the story of our lives and our world. In terms of a roadmap, though, you said, is it like a roadmap for the reader? Yes and no, because I really wanted to write the story in multiple perspectives, because although I wanted the story to be about transformation and about this reconnection to the natural world, I really wanted to show that for each person, that journey is going to be very, very different, because everybody's starting in a different place with their own life, with their own history. And I had some pressure from at times when I was writing this, from editors, publishers, to just choose one perspective and not have three. And I was like, no, it's got to be three, or it's got to be more than one person. I certainly wasn't going to make it 5 people, but I'd settled on 3, and I really wanted to show that basically each character is grappling with their own set of life crises, and then undergoes this change and this reconnection. And I think I've now lost the thread of what you were asking me, actually.
Well, I guess to keep it more general and not go deep into the characters, what kinds of deep personal changes or changes in our minds do you think are necessary to meet these times, and how does the story help us to understand how that change could come about?
Wow, that's a really big question.
It is a big question, but the novel definitely helps us to think about it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's all kinds of changes that are necessary, but I think what would I say? I think the biggest change is just to put it very simply, is this change in our sense of how we look at the natural world, and perhaps if I could just put it very simply, if we looked at the others, which is everything that's non-human, the others, as our teachers, and that would be one huge change. And if we understood that since we do live within a web of life, that it would be in our interests and our actually, in terms of healing our cultural wounds, I think it's absolutely necessary to come back to that web of life. The book is really about a kind of coming home, I think. That's how I think of it, as coming home to the world that's waiting there, the world that's waiting all around you, like the beautiful places that I showed at the beginning. The experience of, I did a lot of research for this book, rather immense amount of research. And one of the things I was reading was of course, the history of Toronto, its development, the history of Toronto geographically, and that story, part of it is really about the land, the natural world, becoming more and more hidden, of course, as development grows, to the point where it becomes kind of nooks and crannies, and as someone described it to me recently, sort of nooks and crannies in the urban environment and in our consciousness, and I think that's kind of how we live. So, yeah, can we give those nooks and crannies more sort of honor and attention in our lives, and maybe see that they're actually not nooks and crannies at all? So, the lake, for example, is really important in this book, and one of the things that struck me early on when I was thinking about this book was how the lake is there and huge, and the city has very little relationship to it. So just to take one prominent example, most of us have very little relationship to the lake, and yet it's this great being that's right there, that has a profound influence on our lives, whether we're aware of it or not. It's affecting weather, it's affecting all kinds of things. Yeah, so I guess you asked, like, how do we change our minds? I would say it's opening our awareness in whatever way that works for each person, to start to have that relationship where you look at the others as teachers, perhaps.
So this reminds me of something that I would love to. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot for this. Like, we're here at Innis College. We're here at the University of Toronto. There's a central character who is a graduate student at the University of Toronto. And I'm just curious what the role of academia is here, and academic ways of thinking. You said you did a lot of research. What is the relationship between the kind of research you were doing and the kind of research that the character has to do in the book? Are there... For those of us who are here in this university, are there particular ways of changing our minds in academia? I mean, you open this question up, I think, quite a bit in the book. But I wonder if you want to, without giving anything away, talk just a little bit about the academic context and why you felt like you wanted to include that.
Yeah, I wanted to include that because, as I said, moths are important in the book. I guess it isn't necessarily about the fact that they're moths, but I wanted to include, the kind of scientific relationship with the natural world, the academic relationship with the natural world, which one of the characters is, as a grad student, as you said, is learning. She's at the master's level, and she's being kind of brought into these practices of learning to be a scientist. And I wanted to include that to critique the kind of emotional distance that science requires between the studier and its subjects, which unfortunately, even though that there's can be benefits of that objective distance, it also, I think, just reinforces that sense of separation between self and world, and then can also, as the character experiences, lead to the strange paradox of, in her case, because she's studying a living being, the scientists having to kill their subjects. And this is the paradox that the character tries to grapple with, of like, how am I supposed to be doing this work on behalf of life when I'm supposed to also kill my subjects, but this is just the way of things. So I think the book is, I am trying to deal with this tension between rationality and our emotional, or our relationship to the world, and how these can exist with a lot of tension, especially in academia, I think, where we're generally trained to remove the emotional self. In that
Yeah,
sense.
and there's all these rigid structures, right, that are set up. Like, this is how you have to prove something. This is how you have to set up a thesis project, da 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 da. And all of that gets kind of broken down in the course of the novel. Oh, I'm giving away too much. Okay. And it's very interesting as, as a scholar, to think about what are some other ways we can do research. What are some other ways that we can articulate what we consider to be truth? And especially in the sciences, it's helpful to have a character in the sciences because it's so stark in the sciences, right? Yeah. And in our humanities fields, we get away with a little bit more. But yeah, so that's very powerful. I have so many more questions, but I don't know. Could someone tell me when we should be going to the opening?
I think about now, probably. But Charlie?
Okay, so one more thing. Should we go to the really tough ones, or should we just... I kind of want to hear more about the Toronto Island. So you mentioned just in your slideshow that you spent some time there. And I think the islands are kind of exotic for a lot of people, weirdly. Like, they're right there. You just get on the ferry and you can go there, and yet it's not really a part of most of our urban experience. And that's significant in the novel, and it seems significant in your writing experience too. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned in the slideshow, Toronto Island. I think I mentioned this. I meant to say, I originally started going to Toronto Island because there's a wonderful writing retreat there called Gibraltar Point. So I went just to hole up and do work, and that was when I was just kicking around very early versions of this book that were very different from now, and then gradually the island started to kind of work its way into the book as being really important to the story, because it occupies this unique place in Toronto, both geographically, and I think for most people who are not from Toronto, they have a hard time, like, people aren't aware that there is an island here, and it's hard to picture an island here, which is why I included maps in the book. So it has this it's an oddity, and then of course it has this otherness to it because it's apart from the city. It has a whole different kind of community there. There are no cars on the island. There are no stores on the island. It's like a little village. But also it just insisted as like a wonderful, rich way of delving into the tensions in our lives, in our culture, between, say, development and all that human economy and the natural world and our love for it. So the island, for those who don't know, has been the site of contentions for decades. In fact, for going back over a century in terms of development, there's been a lot of tension around competing visions for what Toronto Island should be. People want to commercialize it. People want to keep it bucolic and beautiful. People want to, all of that is built into the history of the island. And it's fascinating. And it's also fragile. It's just a sandbar. It's very low. It used to be a peninsula, and now it's an island. That story's in the novel, but it's fact. I can reveal that. It's subject to flooding. This is has been an ongoing issue for a long time. So its fragility and vulnerability, its beauty, it's the island as this site of contention between what kind of life do you want and what's important, what kind of society do we want and what's important. All of that I just thought was like wonderfully caught up with little Toronto Island.
Because it's in crisis. Like
Yeah.
it's a piece of land in crisis.
It is.
That is just over there.
Yeah.
That we're not thinking about very much, and yet
Yeah.
there's these people living there who are constantly dealing with rising water.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up, we talked about the Persephone Project a little bit. Do you want to just mention the impact of? So another colleague of ours created a workshop for us on the island. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit? Maybe just the impact of that on your research?
Yeah, so one of the things, there was a lot of research that I did around ecological crisis for this book, but also just, as I said, the history of the land here and over time and settlement here. And it was a fascinating experience that I had done this work for about a decade, and then just in the last, like right before the pandemic, really, we ended up going to the island.
It was February 2020, I remember now.
Yes.
Yes.
It was really on the cusp. And we went and met with a couple of island elders, I think I would call them, who had been actively trying to learn about rising floodwater and the causes and how to address it. And we met people from the Flood Committee of Toronto Island, and were in their homes, and they were presenting all this research in the context of our project. But I was just sitting there going, this is exactly what I've been writing about. And I had talked to a couple of islanders years before, but it just all felt very fraught and urgent and I don't know, affirming, and just in a strange way that this was something worth writing about, I guess. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't. It became so not just urgent, but so present for us. Again, the impacts of climate change, the impacts of environmental degradation are not always in your face in that way in the middle of the city. And that experience was really, really powerful. Yeah. Okay, is it time to, I don't know what that, is that telling us it's time to open up the floor?
Somebody's dinging. What is the dinging?
It does.
It just stopped.
I just have to stand here. So what we'd ask is if you have a question that you signal by raising your hand, and then mic runner will come and hand you the mic so that everyone can hear your question. And we certainly invite you to ask questions. So don't be shy. Or I'll start the dinging again. Okay, there's
like
a couple of questions.
Simon
over
and
there.
then Ben.
So Shivani also has a mic, so she will.
wondering, Sharon, if there were ways in which you saw Toronto differently after researching this piece. Like Andrea, you mentioned seeing Philosopher Walk and knowing that Tattle Creek is below Philosopher Walk. I didn't know that, and now I will never see the Philosopher Walk the same way. And I wonder if there were discoveries like that in your research, Sharon.
Yeah, constantly. My entire vision of the city changed over that time, and my whole relationship to it changed because it's like that background foreground thing that I was talking about, where once you see what's in the nooks and crannies or the background, once you see what's underpinning everything, then you're not unseeing it. So my sense of the city became, I should stress this actually, it was very joyful to do a lot of this research. It was immensely joyful because I was going out of the gray concrete shitty street that I'm on, and I'm walking into Humber Ravine, which is not that far from where I was living, and discovering this whole world, and then doing that almost daily, and going on these wanderings, these walks. So just on a personal level, like my whole sense of being here altered over time. I used to, I think before I was writing this book, I felt a lot of tension of living in the city and wanting to get away from the city a lot, get out into the natural world, and then I started to come into this relationship with the places here. It's not always easy with our lives, right? But I did discover that I could have that relationship if I set the intention of having that relationship. And yeah, it's like just all these riches that are there that I didn't realize are there. And I can see Bonnie nodding at that because I know you've had a similar experience too. So yes, it was life-changing. Thank you.
I just want to add that what you just said, it's so much fiction about environmental crisis and climate change and all that is not joyful. Let's put it that way. It's dire. It's urgent. And this book, you just put your finger on it. That's one of the things I think that I just took away from it is it's a book about people in crisis and land in crisis, but also falling in love. Mm-hmm. There's a kind of incredible uncovering of the joy that you can experience if you can break down all of that incrustation that doesn't let us make that connection with the land under our feet, and to start doing that. And so it takes so much for them to break it down, but once they do, it's so marvelous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ben had a question, I think. Yeah.
Related to his question, so hopefully not redundant. But I'm, from the photos that you showed at the beginning and the discussion of some of the types of wildness and nature that you find in the city, I'm curious about, how you sort of have to come to that, I guess, almost argument with nature in the city as a natural space, like which of these environments were here and we built the city around it, or which of these environments were forced into being by people. There's that old argument, are the Toronto Islands artificial or not, because it's a peninsula, and then it was a storm that made it into an island, but some people argue, well, it's artificial, and the reason is because for a long time they kept repairing it to keep it as a peninsula, and it became an island because they just gave up. So is that people making nature that way, or is that relinquishing power? And I'm really curious about that sort of competition of encroaching spaces in the novel, and how you navigate and find that. And if it's a spoiler, you can just ignore me.
I don't think it's a spoiler, but I don't quite understand what you're saying. Like you're talking about the tension between development and the wild spaces, and or what is really wild after all, because everything's been altered, or is that?
Yeah, kind of like that idea that some of these spaces of nature were there and they developed, and the city just happens to be near it, and which ones were sort of like human projects and how that intersects.
Yeah, I don't think there's. Okay, cool. I understand now. I don't think there's any part of this city that hasn't been touched and altered in probably profound ways by us. Not that doesn't mean that's all bad, right? But at least from my sense of things over time, like things. Nothing here is more pure or pristine of how it was, say, before settlement, but I think we can sort of not toss out pure and pristine, but I don't think that's a very helpful kind of category to apply to our relationship with the natural world. Like, things have been altered, and some places are in recovery from that, and some places are in degradation, and then there's everything in between. And I think it's very complicated, all of that sort of texture. But when I think about like connecting with the natural world, like it's. I think it's what would I say about it? I think one of the most important things, and I don't really get into this in the novel, maybe it'll be the next novel, is how that relationship can be not just restorative for people, which I think I'm trying to make it in the novel, but restorative for the natural world. But I think that's an ongoing long project of what that restoration is going to look like, what that restoration of creation, and how, and where it starts is just through that connection with whatever space is there, or whatever tree is there, or I don't know if I'm answering your question, but yeah. I think that I mean, we're kind of, it's part of that tension that we live in, that we think, wilderness is this pristine thing over there, and what we got here is just all kind of messed up and human controlled and all true, but it's still the natural world that's holding us, feeding us, giving us our water. Our water all comes from the lake, rain, like. That's all still the world, even if it's been altered over time, Yes, this gentleman here. Joel. Oh, hi, Joel. Yeah.
I don't remember which Kimmerer article it was that I was reading, but she begins it by describing attempting to explain this sustainability workshop that she's off to as an academic to her father. And his response is, he's like, yeah, it still sounds like just a bunch of people taking from the earth, right? So I'm sort of interested, maybe, I've read less than half the novel, so I guess I want to ask, how did you grapple with some ethical concerns around that, the notion of relationship? And I think at one point you have one of the characters say, or the narrator says, that, maybe you can't know the land or live on the land unless you're indigenous. Maybe I'm misremembering.
I don't think anybody says that.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Okay. But I guess just the notion of of relationship then
Mm-hmm.
is something that kind of happens in community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really an act. Like, this is sort of the, I mean, this is my opinion, right? But kind of the same thing with a spiritual experience. It's not just that you sort of open yourself up to a new way of looking at things and then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but you have to participate
Mm-hmm.
in a relationship. So I don't know. I guess, sorry, this is turned into just like a confused thing, but I guess I just wonder about like the idea of relationship and like, oh, you know, putting both your feet on the ground and just like being able to see things
Yeah.
clearly. I'm not sure that's it. I wonder if there's a danger of, I don't know, this kind of, sorry, I'm so nervous I can't talk. But just like, just as a
Why are
way
you
of,
nervous?
as a
I'm
way of
going
kind
up
of,
here.
yeah, I definitely don't want to be up there. Yeah, as a kind of, you know, as a kind of placation or, as a kind of way of fostering this optimism that we feel like is necessary because we live in such a deflated, defeated time, right? When in fact, and I don't know, I feel like maybe some of the same criticisms are of like land acknowledgements, you know, like what does a land acknowledgement do except,
Yeah.
you know, allow things to kind of keep going forward, you know,
Yeah.
it's kind of reformist mode of being.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was really confused, but
That's okay. That's okay,
Somebody
Joel.
take this away
Thanks
from me.
for piping up. And so, what can I say? So one of the things, without giving things away, because you're reading the book, one of the things that I felt I had to do in the book was to, and I hope I'm not repeating myself, but to push the characters to this point of a kind of personal unraveling or breakdown, where they're not sure who they're supposed to be anymore, or they come to question who they think they ought to be, what their notion of success is, like, is it really that? The importance of success, and how they know what they know, if that makes sense. And it was in that kind of breakdown that there's a humility, and that's where the land really starts to speak more to them. So I think I don't know. I'm not quite sure what your question is or your comment around ethics. I think like ethics are incredibly important consideration because this novel has a real moral dimension to it. I'm just not quite sure what your angle on that was, but I think in terms of false optimism or a kind of, you know, potentially patronizing view of like our relationship to the natural world, I think all of that is really a danger that we just, you know, hope that by changing a few things, we might fix the problems that we're facing. And of course, the crises that we're in are very deep and profound, and the wounds are deep and profound. And so it's not just going to be a few changes that are necessary, which is why pushing the characters to this point of unraveling almost. But I do want to stress, I don't think the book, you didn't say the book has a false optimism, I'm just grabbing that phrase. I don't think the book contains anything like that, or at least it wasn't my intention to. It was my intention, though, to show that this humility that characters discover and this vulnerability is very nourishing, that there is a real possibility of personal restoration in this relationship, And that's the joyful stuff that I was talking about. That was my experience, and continues to be my experience. And so that's very subjective and personal, not political, and just that was the real stuff that I was trying to forward in the book. Yeah.
I'm wondering, just to jump in for a second, I don't know if this was your question exactly, but there is a difference, perhaps. You started off talking about both feet on the shore. A difference between claiming land and allowing the land to claim you. And I wonder if that is the ethical dilemma at the heart here.
I think so. Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Yeah. Couple more questions. We've got Jeff here, and then Per. Yeah. Either or.
Yeah, we're fine. Everybody should have a shot.
Okay. Well, there's a yep. Oh, and a gentleman up there too. Hi.
Right. Hello. As someone who is both interested in science and philosophy, I see how the researcher in your book is grappling with the concern of trying to kill the life that she's trying to conserve. But I would reason that would only be an issue if the tag you were giving the researcher is a moral objectivist. But suppose we are thinking about what brings about the greatest good, or the utilitarian standpoint, then there is no paradox in thinking about whether or not we are killing the life that we are supposed to conserve, if the output would be far greatly outnumber the loss of potential lives. And so I want to know if you were giving the researcher that moral objectivist tag in their writing.
Well, without giving much away about what happens in that's one of the three stories in the book. That's exactly what she's grappling with. What you just described is, the greater good of ecological research, and then some of the aspects that she's uncomfortable with in the process. And the book is not it's not a formula. This is one character's experience, but I did want to kind of confront her head on with that collision between, at a really personal level, because she's doing field work, so she's right up with it, how do I harm what I'm trying to save, and is that okay, and where do I go with all that? And I think that's a really important but deeply personal question, and that's what I was trying to portray. And then she has a particular answer, or what she comes to, but it's through her journey itself that she comes to it. So that's what I mean by it's not like me making an argument and saying this is it and therefore the conclusion is. It's really because of her experiences that she makes certain choices, and you'll have to, I don't want to talk about what they are, but I don't know if that makes sense.
Right, to push back a little, I mean, I want to push back on your retort on the fact that it's deeply personal.
Yeah.
I would assume that if we were to, if there was a potential of, for example, one of the problems in correlational studies in psychology is that you can't randomly assign stuff to reach the causation level. But we can't do that because it's not ethically plausible. We can't randomly assign, for example, this ability to study some sort of causation that we'd want to find. I mean, so that is not personal. It's some moral framework that binds us all. So if it is as wrong to cause harm to anything that has sentience, for example, then it rises above the personal level of what we personally have to decide as to what is wrong or right, and it comes back to this larger framework of moral responsibility that we have to grapple with through conversation and really deep philosophical underpinnings of these issues.
I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think that's why I was trying to bring it back to the personal, that it's not like that. Ultimately, she's got to decide what kind of relationship she wants with this being that the beings that she's studying, or that, does she want that kind of relationship that's of more detachment and therefore do the work in this way, or does she want a different kind of relationship which takes her down a different road? And again, I don't want to give away, but I think that's why I kept bringing it back to the personal, because I think it is about it. There is something about what kind of relationship you decide you're going to have with the subject itself, whatever that subject is, and then how you're going to approach it. Is it going to be good for you to approach it in this objective way or not? And yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Per.
Hi, Sharon. So I'll just start by saying I haven't read the book yet.
Yeah.
And I have a question about the role of the city in your book, after having listened to a lot about the natural world.
Yeah.
I've only lived here now for a little over 2 years. I think it was mentioned also that you're not from as big of a place like this, even though London, Ontario isn't perhaps tiny. And one might feel inclined to think that smaller places are closer to nature. And so setting the story in a city helps you emphasize some of the tensions that I've heard you talk about. But I also heard you saying that you want to move away from this idea that sort of the real natural world is something pristine out there, and then we have the man-built environment here. And so I guess my question is, after your research and writing this book, is there something you think that's easier to come to know about nature from the point of the view of the city as opposed to going out into nature?
Wow, that's such a cool question. Is there something easier that you can come to know? I would say in some interesting way, yes. And I think it has to do with a sense of being at home. I think I'm just totally shooting from my gut here, so to speak. I think it has to do with if you live in the city and this is your home, there's something about coming home to the home that you're in that is very different than I went on a hiking trip and to this mountain I'd never met before, and then I came back. There's an intimacy. So I don't think that's like a prescription for coming to know the natural world and its greater diversity in general, but if your project is just becoming more intimate, it's easier to do than right where you are. And that's actually why I set the novel in the city, because that's mostly where we are. I don't know if does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And Sharon, isn't there also a kind of magic in, like you talked about nooks and crannies, like there's a magic in thinking you know a place really well and then discovering the kind of what lies beneath aspects that only kind of become magical because you thought it was something else. And so the city sort of looks like it really presents itself in a very clear sort of way. And then suddenly you discover, oh, wait, there's all this other magic that we didn't know about. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. How are we doing, Charlie? Jeff, you had a question?
Yeah, sure.
I can hear you, yeah. Oh, sorry, okay. Yeah, oh yes, thanks, yeah.
Oh, hi, Sharon.
Hey, Jeff.
This is sort of more a general writing question.
Okay.
Anyways, when you have different characters in your book, do you find that you have to live in those characters? I mean, is it sort of create like a different sort of reality for you, having to go in and out of characters? I guess it's more a general question as a writer.
Yeah.
I've often wondered about that, is with writers if that's something they have to do, sort of. They have to almost live an alternative life.
Yeah.
Is that something you experience?
Yeah, but I'm going to throw it back to you because you're a photographer. So there's like an immersive quality to going to practicing any art form or other things that we practice, sport, whatever. Right. There's an immersive quality to it, right. And I think what's different with writing is that it's all happening here. And these characters, rather than you going out on location, although you do have to live with these characters. You have to get inside them, and as a writer, my work is very what they call character driven, which means that's I'm more interested in that guides the plot, the people and their problems guide the plot, and it's a kind of it's almost a kind of through the imagination, a kind of not a trance state, as in you're not aware, but it is a kind of altered state that you're in, because you're sitting there thinking, but being in this whole, like, imagining all these scenes, and what is this person, how do they walk, and what's their voice like, and delving into this whole other reality that you're essentially making up. It is an odd experience. It's deeply immersive. It's deeply thrilling if you like that kind of thing, which I do. These characters, as the cliche is true, these characters take on a life of their own. They seem to come to you and then slowly reveal themselves. Right. And then some don't. I mean, I've talked about this I've got some wonderful students here, and we've talked about this in class, about how, you to quote a writer friend who's also here somewhere, you follow the energy in writing, and lots of ideas come to me as a writer, and I know to other writers. You get lots of ideas, lots of different characters. Not all of them pan out. Sometimes you follow that energy and it just fizzles. Right. And then these others come and they just gain presence and complexity. And
do the different characters, are they elements of different part of your psyche, do you think?
Yeah. I do. Okay. Yeah, I think they're elements of me. They're also, I also think a lot about archetypes and kind of archetypes of people. And so the characters kind of embodying certain qualities. And then all kinds of other stuff pours in, like things people say, aspects of people it's like it all swirls in there. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff.
Oh.
Connor.
Hi. There we go. So I found it very ironic that I think the first short story I submitted for your course was about, in a rudimentary way, a character coming to have an understanding, an epiphany by being surrounded by the natural world. So I think it's beautiful that you've taken that concept and elaborated it into an entire novel.
I did. Thank you.
No, but so I thought during that experience that the relationship that one person has with nature is very unique and almost deeply personal. Mm-hmm. And you have taken it and separated it into 3 different characters having their own unique and personal epiphanies or realizations.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, as a writer, how did you bridge that gap where it might be, you said it was, I was fearing that maybe you answered parts of this question just now, but that you bridged the gap for that unique perspective and realizations that each character would have individually, as you being, an individual writer yourself. Mm-hmm. If you understand what I'm saying.
So how did I bridge that gap between the 3 different
Yeah,
experiences?
because they would, I'm assuming, be all unique
Yeah.
to a certain extent. And how did you, from a writer's perspective, put the frame of mind to each have their own epiphanies, you know what I mean, in relation to nature?
Yeah. It wasn't easy. It was, because I wanted them in some ways to end up in the same place, but in a very different way, and then what they experience means something different to each character, of course, because of where they've come from. And how did I bridge that gap? How did I do that? Can you help me out? I'm not sure how I did it.
I mean, does it maybe have something to do with the plot? Because
Yeah.
of the way that they relate to one another helps to do that? I mean,
Yeah.
and that's how I would begin to think about it, is that you devise not only their own, each of them having their own personal journey and their own personal relationship with the natural world, but they also have relationships with each other.
Yeah, that happens too. Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure how I did it though. It was, I think, just a lot about trying to make very convincing, subtle shifts happen for each character, and it took, here's a good teacher's point, it took many, many, many drafts. That's how I did it. Endless drafts. And then another rewrite, and then more drafts. I think that's my best answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. I can't wait to read.
Mike, do you have a question at the back?
Go right ahead.
Oh, yep.
It just it kind of follows on the heels of the last two questions. It's a writing process question for you. You've talked about 3 different characters in 3 different places, the place associated with each character primarily. Just wondering, can you say whether the characters came first and then the places that would be associated with them, or was it sometimes the other way around, or in tandem, or?
The characters came first, and then the places that were associated with them. Yeah, I knew that, for example, Toronto Island was going to be in the book. This book went through, like, it's gone through many transformations from where it originally started. Toronto Island was a constant after the first, no, that's not true. It was a constant after the first couple of years. So I guess it wasn't a constant. But the characters emerged first, and then their stories started to grow. I knew after the first year or so that the story was going to be about these 2 brothers, and that they would each have very different relationships to the natural world, and that would kind of be a baseline for the book. And then the 3rd character came in later. And it was only as I started to develop the characters more that their associations with these places began to solidify. One character with Rice Lake, one with the island, one with the Humber River. But that all evolved really after the characters' stories started to emerge. Yeah.
Was there ever a point where the character was involved with a place that was different from, the place that they ended up in the finished novel?
No, they kind of their stories grew, or their personalities grew, and what they were grappling with grew, and then I located that, the location kind of was solidified there, and that was, I really needed to put them somewhere and to figure that stuff out before I got too carried away with the story. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Well, a few things in closing. First is thank all of you, I'm sure on behalf of Sharon and Andrea, for coming and those questions. Don't forget, in case you have not purchased the book, I believe the books are still out in the lobby for sale. I want to thank the publisher again for helping to support this evening. I'll just say in closing for myself that I think the best and the most enriching author conversations are ones that, if you've read the book already, make you think differently about the book, and then if you're someone like me who hasn't yet read it, wants to make you read it all the more. So I thank both of you for that, and Sharon for the gift of this book.